Alrighty, treatment of Japanese Americans, Japanese Latin Americans, and Japanese Canadians. Now, the Japanese and Japanese Americans in the United States of America. You need to understand that Pearl Harbor is going to set off a wave of hysteria across the Americas. Now, this hysteria is going to be targeted to anyone of Asian descent, but particularly towards those of Japanese descent. Now, these individuals are going to be put into two different categories: EC, which are immigrants who were born in Japan, and Nisi, which are children of immigrants. This is going to be coming from the Japanese word for one and two. Okay, so is and nis, the Japanese word for one and two. So first generation Americans, Japanese Americans, second generation Japanese Americans, right through here. So it is important to understand there's going to be this category and this breakdown of Japanese Americans. 275,000 Japanese individuals have immigrated to the United States by 1941. So when Pearl Harbor happens, there are 275,000 Japanese immigrants living in the United States, and 2/3 of them were, in fact, American citizens. 1/3 of them still had their citizenship in Japan. The vast majority of them, though, 66.6%, were going to be we're going to be American citizens at this time. Now, the prejudice towards the Japanese was long-standing. This was not something that suddenly just kind of came about right away around this time. There was a lot of prejudice in the United States, particularly towards Asian Americans for a long time, but this is going to really kind of fuel up after Pearl Harbor. There was going to be pro-Japanese sympathizers in the United States. We're going to have the San Francisco Japanese Military Servicemen's League, which is an intensely nationalistic organization, really in favor of what Japan is doing. They like the Empire of Japan. They feel that Hirohito is really doing a good thing, that Tojo is really doing a good thing, and they're intensely nationalistic. Now, this is going to cause a lot of fear by a number of individuals in the United States and in the U.S. government, that these individuals were vehicles for espionage and sabotage because they believed they were indoctrinated by the Japanese government. That is why they are so intently nationalistic on Japan and sympathetic to what Japan is doing, and that they feel that really it's quite reasonable for them to become spies and to try to sabotage the United States war effort. Now, after Pearl Harbor, when Japan attacked the United States naval base, FDR, President of the United States, is going to issue a proclamation of illegal aliens. At what point he's going to be at which point is happening, 3,000 were going to be identified as illegal aliens and detained by the Department of Justice, the DOJ. These individuals that were identified as illegal aliens, half of them, okay, so 1,500 around there, were going to be Japanese. Now, there's going to be a fear of enemy agents within the United States, of spies working for the enemies in the United States, and this proclamation of illegal aliens is really going to help provoke that fear. Japanese Americans are going to be attacked. There's going to be a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment by by American citizens. They're going to be destroying Japanese property, and Roosevelt really is not sure what he needs to do and how he needs to proceed. Now, there is going to be a lot of pressure put on individuals to evacuate those of Japanese descent from the Pacific Coast area. We get General John DeWitt, who's the commander of the Western Defense Command, and General Henry Stimson, who is United States Secretary of War. These two are placed under immense amount of pressure to figure out what we need to do to protect the United States from Japan, and particularly to protect the United States from possible Japanese sympathizers in the country. Ultimately, this is going to lead to Executive Order 9066, which is probably one of the most influential executive orders in the history of the United States. It's going to be signed on February 19th, 1942, and it's going to designate military areas of strategic significance. So certain areas that are considered strategically significant to the United States of America and their war effort. At this time period, they're going to remove any and all persons from these areas who are considered a threat, okay? So anyone who could potentially be a threat is going to be removed from this area. So now this is including first, second, and third generation Japanese Americans. So these Nisi and these EC, and then the third generation Japanese Americans living here, they've got to figure out what's going to happen to them because the U.S. government has just deemed them a threat in these areas of strategic significance. Therefore, they got to go somewhere else. But where do they go? Now, we're also going to get Executive Order 9102 in March 18th, 1942, which is going to establish the War Relocation Authority, the WRA. Now, this is going to be a part of the Department of Emergency Management, and this is going to send Japanese Americans and Japanese citizens living in the United States to internment camps. They're given 48 hours to 6 days to pack their bags. So basically the government's going to show up and say, hey, you've got 48 hours if you're really unlucky, and 6 days if you're lucky, so to speak, in this circumstance where you're really not that lucky, to pack your bags and get ready to be moved to an internment camp indefinitely. The first are going to be sent to assembly centers. The assembly centers are dramatically underprepared. They get there and no one really knows what's happening. There are too many people to process. They don't really know what's going on, and as a result of this, a number of bad things are going to happen. Now, the camps are going to be placed predominantly on unused government land. Now, this unused government land is going to have incredibly harsh climates, often sweltering hot summers and freezing cold winters. Basically, it's going to be a prison camp. Families are usually kept together in the same little living quarter. However, that is not going to always be the case. Those who are considered a larger threat are going to be sent to detention centers and not these internment camps. Okay, these are going to be mostly those that are considered community leaders. So individuals that have a following of Japanese Americans, Japanese citizens that are kind of following them, they're going to be deemed a bigger threat because they have followers, and therefore they're not going to be sent to the internment camps with their family. They're going to instead be sent off to detention centers. Men of draft age are initially going to be prohibited from military service. Nisi are going to ultimately be allowed to start serving in 1943. However, they're going to be put into segregated units, and this is really simply because the United States is in need of soldiers. You've got a bunch of individuals who are willing to work, might as well allow them to work. They were, however, forced to complete a questionnaire in order to prove their loyalty. So other individuals were not having to do this, so you're going to be put into segregated units, and you've got to basically prove that you're loyal to the United States of America, a country that in some instances they were actually born in. This is incredibly humiliating, and this is something they feel very wrong about doing. However, the United States forced them to do this as well. This is a good example of some of the racism and prejudice that was being felt by Japanese or towards Japanese Americans at this time. These individuals are ultimately going to help liberate France and Italy. A lot of them are also going to be serving as translators because they can understand the Japanese language, where the vast majority of American soldiers at this time would not be able to speak Japanese as well. They're also going to be calming Japanese citizens who were told to expect atrocities when the Americans come in. So the Japanese government was telling the individual citizens of Japan that when the Americans come, you better fight, and you better fight like hell, because if you don't, they're going to do some very, very bad things to you. So these individuals are coming in and really going to kind of reassure the citizens of Japan, those who are not soldiers, that the Americans aren't going to hurt them. They're just going after the military infrastructure of Japan to stop that. They're not going to be hurting the citizens, and it's going to really kind of be a way of calming them down, because if someone comes and speaks to you and says, we're not going to hurt you, but they're not really a part of your culture, they don't speak your language, and they don't look like you, it's going to be harder to trust them compared to someone who understands your culture, who sounds like you and speaks like you and looks like you. You're going to be a little bit more calm, and this is going to help the United States war effort. Now, there's going to be a few Japanese who are in Hawaii that were going to be interred. However, the vast majority of Japanese Americans living in Hawaii were not going to be leaving the island. The main reason for this is Hawaii's economy could not function without Japanese labor. There were so many Japanese individuals living in Hawaii that the economy of Hawaii would just crumble without them. So because of that, they're going to keep them there. However, the United States federal government is going to declare martial law in Hawaii, and Hawaii is going to be administered by the U.S. Army until the end of the war. So a certain time you cannot leave your house, lights out. Really, you're living on an island, but it's more of a prison, so to speak. There were going to be legal challenges brought towards Executive Order 9066 as relocation, December 7th of 19, I believe it was 45 or 44, if I remember the year. I'll get that and put it in the comments. At this point, Supreme Court, SCOTUS of the United States, is going to order all these camps closed. Because they're considering them not legal, and historically speaking, they were not legal. Upon the return of these Japanese citizens going home, the Japanese Americans are going to receive little to no support. The vast majority of them are going to lose their homes. Those that operated businesses are going to lose their business, and really they're starting out from scratch. Okay, just like immigrants coming over who sold everything to move to the United States, these individuals who have been here for a long time in some instances are going to be forced to start over with no money, no house, and no real support system. Comments, questions, put it down below. Otherwise, I will see you later. Good luck.